just kind of ignore it.
Oh, that's your supervisor, right?
Yes.
Yes. That would be Andy. What's going to happen is I'm going to say a show marker, just show number, name of the show. We're going to wait 10 seconds, and then I'm going to say hello to Colleen. She's going to say hello to me, and then we're going to introduce you, and we're just going to kind of roll with it.
Okay.
It's conversational. Probably the first question we throw out there is a softball, is how you got started as a pagan.
Okay.
All right.
Lord, how, geez. There's supposed to be like a milestone somewhere. It's a gradual process.
Well, what started you on the path?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Or maybe when did you realize that you were actually practicing pagan?
That's a good one. So, any questions?
I don't guess so.
And then at the end, you'll get a chance to pimp your books. And,
okay.
Tell people any social media websites that you have, all that good stuff. All right?
Sure. Sounds good.
Oh, and also, let's see, what other good things to know. Don't need to spell things out. I put show notes on our website, so they can just go to our website and click on links. So
okay, so like if I want to give my website, I don't have to.
You don't need to spell it out.
Okay, cool.
What else? Anything else you could think of?
Yeah, when we ask for contact information, please only give public contact information.
Well, right, yes.
Well, you never know what kind of, people from around the world you might be getting in contact with through this podcast.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
we have a bunch of people give like their personal Facebook and stuff, and it's like, okay, if you want to do that, we won't stop you. All right. I give out my personal Facebook because I don't care.
Brave man.
All right, so here we go. Let's see. Okay. Scroll of Thoth, episode 18, August 27th, 2014. Hello, everybody, and welcome back.
Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Welcome back to Scroll of Thoth here, and we have another special guest with us tonight. We have Laura Perry. She is a Wiccan priestess, shamanic practitioner. Can't talk today. Has been practicing for many, many years. Also a writer of both fiction and nonfiction, which seems to be a theme amongst pagans. And also, probably most interestingly, kind of an expert on Minoan spirituality. But welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here. That's quite an introduction. I don't think anyone's ever called me an expert at anything before.
Well, it's definitely the most detail I've ever seen on the subject.
Well, Lori, I have to tell you a little bit of a funny, because I was out at the prison today and I was talking to one of the chaplains, and so the podcast came up, and I was trying to tell him, that you had written a book on Minoan spirituality, and he kept saying Samoan. And so, I said, yes, well, I really like the Girl Scout cookies too, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Could be Samoa. It's an island.
Yeah.
Never mind. Anyway, let's get to know you. Tell us how you got started. When did you realize you were a pagan?
Well, I guess really now that you've suggested that I'm an expert, oh my gosh, at Minoan stuff, I think it really was the Minoan stuff that really got me into it in the first place. I had a really great 9th grade art history class, way back in the Dark Ages. And the teacher started at essentially the dawn of time. And so we started with cave paintings and stuff like that. And he worked his way up to the ancient world. And, we did Egypt and all of that fantastic art. And then he showed us the frescoes from Knossos. And I was just blown away. I spent entire days covered in goosebumps. It was so familiar. Um, and to me, when I looked at them, I didn't see them the way they are now, faded in ruins. I saw them the way they were. And honestly, that really freaked me out,
Yeah.
especially seeing as how I grew up in a secular household in a totally secular culture at that time. Um, but I was hooked at that point on the ancient world, and so I felt really compelled to go exploring, and there was next to nothing about the Minoans or ancient Crete. You know, there was like a mention in a paragraph in one book in my school library, which was really pitiful. And there wasn't anything more in the public libraries, and you know, way back in the Dark Ages, there was no internet. So I had to scrape and scrounge with what I could find. It wasn't until sometime in the middle of college when I had access to the huge library that I realized that there was a lot of information out there, maybe not in the general public eye, but about the Minoans and the Egyptians and the Sumerians and all those fantastic people who believed in a worldview that was totally different from anything anyone had ever even suggested to me. You know, no one talks about their worldview in a history class,
No.
right? They just give you like the names of the leaders and who killed whom. And
You
so
get the
here,
Egyptians, you get the Greeks, you get the Mesopotamians, but Crete is just kind of lumped in with the Greeks for like a paragraph.
if that, if that. And somewhere along in there, I realized that that worldview was my worldview. That the way those people saw the cosmos was the way I saw it. And it was quite a few years after that before I realized that there were other people out there who thought the way I did. So I walked around for a long time thinking I was a freak and had been born in the wrong century. But yeah, that was, and I didn't even know it was called pagan. You know, I had no idea until I was in my, I guess, mid to late 20s, at which point I discovered the pagan community.
I,
Um,
I've got to say I'm jealous because I have very few of those spiritual experiences, especially at a young age. I've always had to like really work hard to get to that state, and I'm always a little bit jealous of people having it. It's got to be amazing, especially something so specific.
yeah, it was. I can look back at it now in hindsight, and see how amazing it was. At the time, it really freaked me out. In high school, I had dreams that I later realized were past life memories from Crete, and a number of them were pretty traumatic. And I really had no one I could share that with. Um, you know, there was no internet where I could go looking for people or information or anything. So it took a long time for me to kind of fit any of that into a framework where I could really internalize it and understand it and use it to make my life better.
You know, before we get too involved in this, if you can take a couple of minutes and give us a synopsis of this worldview that you're talking about, because I would bet the majority of our listeners don't have much more idea about what Minoan spirituality and who the gods and goddesses are than you did all those years ago.
Okay, well, yeah, it is definitely one of the lesser known pantheons. Um, Crete is a small island, and by small I mean 150 miles long and about 40 to 45 miles wide. That's pretty tiny.
So bigger than Long Island, but still pretty small.
Yeah, not a whole lot bigger than Long Island, actually. And it's off the south coast of Greece in the Mediterranean. It's a really beautiful area. Um, the island has mountains in the middle, and it has beaches around the edge. It's actually very popular, a popular spring break destination for British college kids who go and hang out on the beach there. And it has been inhabited for at least 10,000 years, since Neolithic times. And the people who lived there throughout ancient times had what I think is probably a typical, I guess you could say, Neolithic and ancient worldview, which is that the earth is a living thing and that we are a part of it. We're an integral part of the system. We're not separate from it or above it. And that there are powers, spirits, gods, whatever you want to call them, that are a part of that as well, and that we're connected with all of them. Most of the Minoan deities are directly connected with physical places on Crete. And I'm not talking like, oh, this is the cathedral where we go to worship this god. I'm talking this is the cave where this god was born. So it's very much an earth religion, very connected to the actual soil.
Would you say that makes it more animistic
Definitely.
than other religions? Okay.
Definitely. A lot of the Minoan pantheon was eventually borrowed into the Greek pantheon, a third to a half, depending on how you count them, of the denizens of Mount Olympus come from Crete.
Examples?
Dionysus, Rhea, those are the two big ones. Hera is actually an alter ego of Rhea. The Greeks looked at Rhea and said, gee, I don't know, there's this big mother goddess all by herself without a husband to tame her. We need to fix that. So they, so that, yeah, a very, very large portion. I don't want to get down on the Greeks because classical Greek society is really pretty beautiful, but an awful lot of their mythology comes straight from Crete, straight from like Europa.
Okay.
Zeus actually was supposedly born in a cave on Crete. Yeah, an awful lot. The Mycenaean pantheon looks very much like a slightly enlarged version of the Minoan pantheon. A lot of these deities are named in the Linear B tablets that have been found in Minoan ruins.
Would you say that might be a reason why a lot of there's a lot of people out there who say Crete might be Atlantis, that this might be the idea of this kind of proto-culture that became Greece?
Yeah, an awful lot. Well, there is actually a physical catastrophe that happened. Because Crete is right there in the eastern Mediterranean, not too far from the island of Santorini, which is, the ancients called it Thera, and it's a volcanic island like Krakatoa, and it did a thing like Krakatoa in about 1600 BC.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be a giant mountain island like the big Hawaiian Islands. Now it's a crater full of seawater. It blew in such a catastrophic way that tidal waves washed all the way across the island of Crete. They found the rubble, the debris, in layers. And that is probably the sort of breaking point for Minoan society. I'm sure they were used to a certain amount of I guess natural violence, you could say.
Right.
Right.
They had a volcano erupt on them, it was like a few hundred years just.
Right. Right, and of course there's, the ocean is big and dangerous, and there are earthquakes around the Mediterranean. There's actually a fault line toward the east and runs up through Turkey, and that so there's evidence that they had been kind of inundated a number of times and rebuilt and rebuilt and rebuilt. They were very tenacious. But there was, I guess, sort of the last straw. At some point, they ran out of resources. Ran out of, ran out of cultural oomph. And that's the point when Minoan civilization, what we can identify it as Minoan, with the colorful naturalistic art, and the very sort of balanced male-female pantheon begins to disappear and be replaced by what we recognize as early Greek.
Now, here's a two-pronged question for you.
Uh-huh.
What is Minoan spiritual practice like, and how do we know?
Okay. By Minoan spiritual practice, you mean what people used to do 3,500 years ago?
Well, let's rewind. Okay.
Okay.
Would you consider yourself a Reconstructionist?
No.
Okay.
I have a group on Facebook called Ariadne's Tribe. Ariadne being one of the big names in the Minoan pantheon, and we have discussed this. There are certain things that you need to be a Reconstructionist. Okay, most of the Reconstructionist traditions, like the Hellenistic and the Norse Reconstruction, rely on texts that tell us the mythology, that tell us what the people did, how they interacted with their gods, how they saw them. We have nothing like that from ancient Crete. The actual language that the Minoans spoke has never been translated. It's written in a script called Linear A, and we have bunches of tablets, clay tablets, where it's written. But in spite of more than a century of people trying their darndest, no one has been able to translate it yet.
That's crazy.
Okay, yeah, and no one can even figure out what language family it belongs to.
Where are those Rosetta Stone people when you need them?
Yeah, tell me about it. Maybe we could conjure up a Linear A Rosetta Stone. That would be a worthwhile magical activity. But Linear B is written in pretty much the same script, but it's actually Mycenaean Greek, very early Greek. And a guy named Ventris translated it in the 1950s. So we know what was written in essentially very late Minoan times, when the Greeks had already kind of taken over and changed the flavor of society somewhat. But we have some idea of what was there before. Apparently, the main activity in terms of religious practice, was shrines. Everybody had a shrine. There are shrines in ordinary houses. There are shrines in the palaces. There are shrines on mountaintops and in caves. So people definitely felt that the gods were right there with them. You would have your little household altar table where you would leave offerings, and I assume pray to your gods or communicate with them in some fashion. People would go to caves. Crete has a big pile of mountains right in the middle of it, and there are thousands of caves in those mountains, and some of them have been sacred since apparently Neolithic times, and they were continued in use even into the Christian era. I guess people would sneak up there when nobody was looking during Christian times, and leave little offerings and ask the deity for a little help.
No.
No,
just didn't fall over like a blanket and everyone.
No.
Wow. Okay, so it's not Reconstructionism, but would you say that you have a spiritual practice that's based off what you would call the character of Minoan civilization, and what does that encompass, and what do you base it from?
I like that. The character of Minoan civilization. I really like that. Yeah, essentially, we know about the pantheon, and we have been able to piece together who the deities are, what they were like, what their functions are, and how they relate to each other and to human beings. And really, there are certain aspects of religious practice that I think have remained unchanged for as long as humanity has been humanity. And the basis of any religious practice is to approach the deity and offer reverence and praise and ask for help, right? I mean, that's your basic, you have a relationship.
It's the basic formula.
Right. And so anything that you do beyond that is the particular flavor of that relationship. Like whether your family has big raucous family reunions or whether two of you go out to dinner alone together, that kind of thing. So Minoan spirituality, from what we can tell from the archaeological ruins and from what some of the Greek writers said about the Minoans, had both a private aspect and a public aspect. And I like to personally incorporate both of those into my practice. I have an Ariadne altar in my office, in between the desk where I write and the desk where I do my artwork. And I do indeed sit there and commune with her and do, I guess, what most people would call prayer. But then there's also big ritual. The Minoans did mystery plays. That was their big public celebration. There's a courtyard outside each of the big temples in Crete, and they had mystery plays enacting the mythology, and that was their big celebration. Apparently the winter solstice was extremely special to them. There's a great deal of evidence that shows that that was the high point of their calendar.
Now, how many of these stories do we have? Because, like, the biggest story I think that everyone knows from Cretan civilization or Minoan civilization is Theseus and the Minotaur.
Right. But that's not a Minoan story. That's a Greek story.
Right, because, well, the Greek guy wins.
Right. Well, I mean, that's what happens when any culture takes over another culture. The pantheon takes over, right?
Sure.
Like when Christianity took over, all the pagan deities suddenly became demons. So that's what you do. You demonize the competition, right?
Very much so.
And the same thing happened. The pagans weren't quite so nasty about it, but they did diminish and minimize the deities of the cultures that they were taking over.
Well, wasn't the Minotaur itself kind of a demonization?
Yes. The Minotauros literally is the moon bull. And he is not a monster. He is the masculine consort of the moon cow goddess, who is Europa, essentially. Most people, when you read about the ancient Minoans, you read all this stuff that Sir Arthur Evans wrote. He was this Victorian gentleman with a Victorian gentleman's mindset and worldview. We won't use nasty language, but let's just say he was a little narrow-minded and sexist. And so he looked at the temples and said, oh, these are the palaces of great kings, and those horns up there must belong to a vigorous bull. Right? Okay, so, and his interpretation of everything that he saw, everything that he dug up, has colored everything that we have learned since about the Minoans. What an awful lot of people don't know, and I only know this because I grew up on a farm. What a lot of people don't know is that until not terribly long ago, all cows had horns, not just bulls, cows as well. Bovines. Right. Yes, bovines have horns. If you look at the herds of cattle that they still have in Africa, that the native peoples have, they're all horned. They have these beautiful long curving horns. So you cannot assume that a pair of horns indicates a bull.
Huh.
Like if you think about Isis and Hathor and the horned headdresses they wear, they're not wearing bull horns, they're wearing cow horns. That's the moon cow.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah. They started doing what's called polling the cattle in the, I guess, late 19th, early 20th century. So they would either cut off the tissue that would grow into horns when they were calves, or they bred certain breeds to not even grow horns because they wanted to keep the cattle in unnaturally cramped conditions. And if they had horns, they would gore each other, and then, there goes your profit.
Well, when I was a little girl, I mean, boy cows and girl cows had horns.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know I'm getting old, but...
So anyway, the Minotaurus is the consort. The moon bull is the consort of the moon cow, and they're both deities. They're not demons. They're not evil. But because that was a very powerful image, and you'll notice what happens to the moon cow, Europa. What happens to her in Greek mythology? Zeus rapes her and carries her away, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So suddenly she's the victim. She's no longer the superior. She's now the inferior, right? And she originally had nothing to do with Zeus. So that's the incorporation and diminishment of her into the Greek pantheon.
Well, actually, and this is semi-related, my first introduction to Minos, or the Minotaur, was through Doctor Who.
Oh, yes.
And I don't remember whether
that counts.
Yeah, whether you remember that episode or not.
Oh, yes.
The horns, they had the big old horned bull and, all of that kind of stuff going on.
Right.
And it was like, okay, to me it triggered, where does this mythology come from?
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that tomorrow night I'm recording a podcast about the new Doctor Who episode. Just a little advertisement there. Go on.
All right.
That's my other podcast, Geeks Out After Dark.
Oh, yes.
Back to Minoans.
Back to Minoans. The Minos is actually probably a title and not an actual person. It's probably the title of the priest who embodied the moon bull, either in ritual or as a sort of job. What modern people have a little difficulty kind of getting their heads around is that religion wasn't a separate thing in the ancient world. Most cultures didn't even have a word for religion as an activity. Just like, you might have a word for work or hobby or whatever. They didn't have a category like that because religion wasn't separate from life. It infused every aspect of life. The temples in ancient Crete were actually the governing bodies, the powers in society. They ran what I guess you could call city-states, although they weren't quite as authoritative and aggressive as some of the later city-states, say, in the Middle East or in Greece. But, yeah?
Getting back to that character of Minoan's civilization, there's one thing that I found pretty interesting reading your book, and then I had to go do some research on it because I didn't believe it, was that Minoan civilization, it seems like, they were great merchants. They made weapons of great quality, but there is not much evidence of them going to war.
Nope.
That they were a very peaceful society, and I'm sure part of that is because they had a lot of natural barriers being out in an ocean.
Right.
But they didn't seem to kill each other either.
Yeah, a lot of people can't believe that, and about once a decade, some academic comes out with a theory that supposedly proves that they actually had a big rockin' navy and beat the crap out of people, and it takes about 6 months for people to start ignoring his theory, Actually, I honestly think that the Minoans were the first successful mercantile society in the world. They made daggers. They sold daggers everywhere. They sold spears. They didn't use them. They sold them. And they had, like you said, they had a natural barrier. They made it clear to everyone that they were not interested in conquering anything beyond their own shores. Therefore, they weren't a threat to anyone. And so they traded with everyone. They traded with countries, nations, empires that were warring with each other. They were very effective at that. They traded with Egypt and the Fertile Crescent and on up into Europe even. There's Baltic amber that's been found in Minoan ruins. So they traded a great distance away. I guess because warfare has been such a primary facet of society for so many centuries, it's hard to imagine a society that's not based on it.
Especially in ancient society.
Right. I can't imagine that it was a utopia. There is evidence that there were slaves.
Well, that was the hard question I was about to get to. So there is also a pretty universal agreement that child sacrifice was a practice. I don't know how common. What part did that play in the ancient spirituality? Do we have any evidence of what that was for?
We are not sure. There have been a handful of finds of what appears to be infant sacrifice or very young child sacrifice. We know that human sacrifice was a part of Minoan religion on some level. There is very little hard evidence, so I really have to go. You mentioned I'm a shamanic practitioner. I do a lot of shamanic journey work to try to figure out how to fill in the gaps. Because we have stuff that we know and stuff that we don't know, and sometimes you need to put something in that space where we don't know in order to craft a ritual or work with this spirituality in the modern world. I'm fairly certain that the legend about the Minos or the Minotaur being killed has to do with the human sacrifice of a member of the priesthood that was possibly cyclic. We know that sacred kings in a number of places in the ancient world were sacrificed on a particular basis every 7 years, every 15 years, something like that.
Or a substitute for the king, because very often it was just somebody else who took the place of the king.
Right.
It's kind of an ancient version of term limits.
That's a term limit the hard way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the child sacrifice stuff that they found looks like it happened during very tumultuous and difficult times. Like maybe it was a desperate kind of thing, rather than a regular part of the society. Of course, that's entirely speculation. No one can prove anything. It's just that the ones that they have managed to identify as this is pretty much a sacrifice looks like they happened during times when the society was collapsing, when the Mycenaeans were moving in very aggressively. There is evidence that almost every single major city in Crete was looted and burnt to the ground during Mycenaean times.
Well, I know other civilizations where we do have records, and we're not picking on the Minoans because child sacrifice was pretty common throughout the Mediterranean, except for maybe Egypt.
Right.
But child sacrifice in other cultures has always been a time when they didn't know if they were going to be able to take care of these children.
Right.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because the Canaanites would often bury their firstborn child in the foundation of a house that they were building.
Okay, so not always, commonly, but that's creepy.
Yeah, it is kind of creepy.
Well, okay, but there is a reason for that. It doesn't make sense to us, but it made sense to them.
Yes, it did.
And
very much so. It was part of the foundation, laying a foundation for a family.
Okay, it's not just that, though. And this is the reason that family members who died were also buried in many cultures right under the floor of the main house, the main living area, because they would be a conduit to the ancestors and the gods for the family. So they were like your telephone line to the other world. And having them there at your threshold, which is a protective, that's a guardian kind of position, or under your living room floor, literally, meant that you had constant access to the powers that were running your world.
Right, and those are symbols of the crossroad.
Right, right. And I
And
mean,
you
yeah.
would want an intercessor at the crossroad.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and actually something that we haven't touched on here, but this ties into it, is ancestor worship. On Crete, the oldest identifiable form of religious practice is ancestor worship at the tombs. The practice appears to have been that when someone died, they had these big, they're called tholoi. A tholos is an old-fashioned beehive that's made out of basketry. They were shaped like that, so they're called beehive tombs. And they would have shelves in them, I guess you could call it. And when someone died, their body was put in the on the shelf in there. And then after a certain length of time, when the flesh had rotted away and there was nothing but bones left, they would do what's called secondary burial, which is actually still practiced in some parts of the Mediterranean. They would go in and they would take the bones and they would dismantle the skeleton and bury the bones in a big jar or box. And only after what was left no longer looked like a body did they feel the spirit was truly free, that there was nothing left for the person to recognize that would hold them there. And then there's a great deal of evidence that at least once a year they had a big festival actually at the tomb. I mean, this would be the equivalent of having a pagan festival in a cemetery. And it was probably at harvest time, because that's the time of year when you have tons of food and can have a big feast. And it was huge. They found remains of what looks like gatherings of hundreds of people at a time, with feasting and drinking and possibly funeral games as well. So that's some of the earliest kind of stuff they did, and it was in honor of the ancestors, who of course eventually become the gods.
Okay, so speaking of gatherings and bringing it back to modern times and modern practices, now you said you have a group that you practice with. Now, does your group specifically focus on a Minoan spirituality, or is that just one aspect that you bring to the group?
No, that's just one aspect. The book is actually something that I put together over the course of many years. So maybe once a year I'll do something Minoan with a group. It's really kind of my dream to have a group that does that all the time, but there aren't that many people who are interested, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was going to kind of ask next. Is like, if someone's interested in this kind of practice, it feels a call to this Minoan civilization. It's going to be hard for them to find a group specifically focused on that, even in a major metropolitan area.
Right.
What kind of things would you say you could do as an individual if you wanted to practice this kind of path?
I would do, what I do is pretty much what individuals did in ancient Minoan society, which is to set up a shrine and make offerings in my home. The traditional offerings are food and wine. Everybody likes a good meal, right?
Sure.
And essentially, it seems to me that the basis of that kind of practice is developing a relationship with the deity. Most of the shrines that we have found in the ruins of Crete appear to be to a particular deity or a small set of deities. So typically each family had, or each individual had, their own god or goddess that they connected with. And they would have symbolic items on the altar that made them think about that deity, and they would make offerings and perhaps meditate or pray, ask for favors, because isn't that what we always do with the gods? Eventually you're going to want something from them. I'm sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned path working.
Mm-hmm.
Is invocation a part of your practice?
Is what?
Invocation, like calling the gods into yourself?
Yes. That's I've only ever done that really in a group ritual. I'm not sure how I would go about that. I'm not sure how I would go about a classic neo-pagan style invocation by myself, because I'm a shamanic practitioner. So what I do is I journey to the gods rather than calling them to me.
Well, and as a solitary, I'm not sure why you would invoke deity anyway, because particularly if deity is taking you over, there'd be nobody there to hear it.
Right. Well, yeah, because the purpose of purpose of calling a god or goddess into the priest or priestess is so that they can interact with the other people.
Exactly.
Right. So that they can provide, like in Norse Reconstructionism, you have the vulva who takes the deity onto her and then pronounces the fortunes of the people and answers their questions and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There is a great deal of evidence that the Minoans actually did that. They did transpossession or something similar in their rituals. When the priest or priestess walked out into the ritual area, they were the deity incarnate. There are some frescoes that show a priestess being dressed in the clothing that makes her the goddess. And so there are special ritual garments, and you put them on and you become the deity. And what's especially interesting is that after the ritual, the priestess disappears into the back room and then takes those clothes off. She's not the deity anymore, but they actually hung those clothes up on a special stand, and people would come and worship them and maybe touch them for healing and blessings.
Well, as in the Bible, they touched Jesus' robe.
Right, right. So the divine energy is there. It was actually on the goddess's body. So.
By the way, a solitary practitioner, speaking as a magician, may invoke alone to grant authority over other spirits, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's kind of a different purpose.
Yeah, that's also a different kind of invocation, because what you're doing in a Renaissance magic type invocation, you're calling the deity to be in the room with you. You're not calling the deity into your body.
Right.
Right?
No, not necessarily.
Oh, you like to play around the fringes, do you?
But you're not stepping out of the way, where you're no longer present. It's just the deity who's present.
Sometimes it fluctuates a little.
Well,
yeah, for the most part, yeah, you're calling the deity into you, so you can say, by the power of Thoth, I command you.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
So you're sharing your body with the deity rather than actually being possessed.
Right.
Or becoming the deity.
But I personally have had moments of I didn't know who was talking.
Now, I have another question, and this question, I may be wrong, and I may have some of my question be misunderstood. But is there not such a thing as a Minoan Brotherhood, which is a gay men's group?
Yeah, I think there is something called that. I'm not sure exactly how it has to do with. I'm not sure that it has to do with actual Minoan spirituality. It seems to be more of tradcraft. and it's called Minoan because because Minoan society strikes people as very open sexually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a whole lot about the organization, but what I do know is that it tends to include gay men.
It's only for gay men.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I have friends who are part of the Minoan Brotherhood.
Okay.
And the imagery that I have seen them use is more early Greek to me, but
Yeah.
I'm not an expert.
Yeah, well, and not being a gay man, I'm kind of not a part of that, so...
Yeah, me either.
I think quite a few people do get Minoan and Greek mixed up. So
I think part of part of it too is that Minoan seems a little more exotic than Greek.
Mm-hmm.
To a lot of people.
That whole idea of the bull energy.
Right. Yeah, and of course nobody has the copyright on Minoan. If someone wants to call themselves that, regardless of, if it means something to them, then I don't see the problem with that.
And it's hard to go around calling yourself the Greek Brotherhood because everyone thinks you're a fraternity. And
Good point.
That doesn't work very well. Okay, so we're getting up on 45 minutes here, so I wanted to take a little time to talk about another subject,
okay.
And that is your fiction writing, because I am also a fiction writer. How did you get started in that, and what influences your fiction?
What influences my fiction is my desire one of these days for a miracle to occur so that I can magically write like Terry Pratchett, Douglas Adams, and Neil Gaiman all rolled into one. But until that miracle occurs, and it will be a miracle, I assure you, I find that fiction is a better way to express some ideas than nonfiction. It's the concept of mystery, the capital M mystery. You can get it across just like they did in the mystery plays. You can get it across with a story a lot better than you can with an essay.
Wow, that's almost exactly the same reason why I wrote my first novel.
Oh, cool.
And then at that point, you don't have to bear the burden of proving your theories.
Well, it's not even a theory. The only fiction that I've actually published so far, my agent, if he's listening, is supposed to be finding me a publisher for my next one. But the only novel that I've published so far is Jaguar Sky, which has a Mayan theme, and that was actually inspired by a trip to the Maya temples in Belize. So I actually went to all the places in the story, and had some really profound experiences there. Very much some past life kind of stuff, and I felt like the most effective way, instead of inflicting, my travel photos on people, the most effective and enjoyable way to get across what I felt like I learned and experienced would be to tell a story. And so that's what I did.
You mentioned your influences there for your writing. Is there a humorous element to this book? I haven't read it, I'm going to confess.
And I've only started reading it, so I've only read, like the first couple of chapters.
Just barely. Not really. I'm afraid it really is. It's a mystical adventure story, I guess you could say. I have tried my hand. That's why I said it would be a miracle. Because I really stink at really good humor writing. I absolutely stink at it. So I read their stuff and I enjoy it, and I dream about how one day there might be a miracle. But in the meantime, I tend to write more, it's not exactly serious, but not purposefully funny kind of stuff. So yeah.
Because life isn't serious all the time, so you probably shouldn't be either.
If life were serious all the time, my head would explode.
So just to pull back the screen a little, I like to talk to other writers about how are your current books published? Do you have a publisher, self-publish?
Okay, all my nonfiction has been published conventionally. Nonfiction's a lot easier to sell to a publisher. And of course, mine were all finished. I didn't do any of it on proposal. I sold them. I sold finished works. Fiction's harder to sell. I did actually have an agent trying to sell Jaguar Sky, but my timing sucked. I got it finished, a Mayan-themed novel, mind you, in 2010, coming up toward the 2012 stuff. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got it edited to the agent's satisfaction and he started shopping it around, all the publishers were already full up with Mayan end-of-time stuff from all their big names, and they weren't buying anything else.
Yeah.
So my timing totally sucked with that one, and I ended up I ended up putting it up one chapter at a time on my blog to start with for free, and I timed it so that the final chapter went up on December 21st, 2012. I thought that was pretty fun.
I actually had a friend of mine who had the same exact problem, except he didn't finish his until after 2012. So.
Oh wow.
Oops.
So anyway, I put it up there, and several of my readers said, please, please, please put it into a whole book so I don't have to keep paging through your blog. So I went and self-published it, and it's only ebook format. I haven't done it in hardcover.
And who is your publisher for the nonfiction?
My current publisher is Moon Books. They are an imprint of John Hunt Publishing, which publishes all kinds of spiritual, pagan, occult, natural health kind of stuff. They're great. It's been a very positive experience. I have been very happy with them.
And you said you've got another book that's about ready to come out for publication?
Well, we can hope. It's a novel. It is set in the North Georgia mountains and involves a great deal of folk magic and hoodoo. And it is a murder mystery in which we know who done it from the very first page. So you have to wonder what the mystery is, huh? But my agent's shopping that to publishers right now, and I'm hoping my timing with it will be a lot better than my timing was with Jaguar Sky. So,
we hope so, too.
It doesn't sound like you have a limiter on that one, so...
I hope not. I hope not. The North Georgia mountains aren't going to crumble anytime soon, so...
One would hope not. Let's see, what else was I going to ask you about your publishing? It just jumped out of my head. So
I hate it when that happens.
Actually, give us the name. I think you've been in one other publication as a contributor.
Paganism 101?
Yeah, I have an essay in Paganism 101. I also have an essay in a book that's coming out next month or two essays rather. It's called Naming the Goddess. I have an essay about Ostara, the controversial goddess of spring equinox. And also an essay about the warrior way, goddess spirituality as a source of political strength.
And then your book about Minoan civilization or Minoan spirituality is called
Ariadne's Thread. So yeah, that's it. As in the ball of string that she gives to Theseus, so he can find his way out of the labyrinth. And all of that and other stuff as well is on my website, which is lauraperryauthor.com. And I actually have a Minoan tarot deck. Yes. So you can go look at the art on the website. I've posted a bunch of the cards. And I have sent it off to a prospective publisher, and I'm waiting to hear back from them. So hopefully that will come to fruition. But that's all my original art, but each card is inspired by a particular fresco or piece of jewelry or something from ancient Crete.
You're an artist too. That's just not right.
But it's all creative acts, right? Writing and art and even ritual. It's all creative acts.
I can't draw to save my life. Just can't do it. I've tried. I want to so bad. I can't.
Oh, wow. Well, so obviously you didn't spend enough time doodling in the margins in school.
I don't know.
That was my formal training, was doodling in the margins until the teachers yelled at me.
But I can write. At least I think I can. I try to channel Chuck Palahniuk and Anne Rice.
Ah.
and they're both still alive, so that's difficult.
Oh, well, you have to catch them when they're asleep, right?
Is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with as far as stuff that you have coming out, or maybe just about Rodney's thread?
Well, if anyone is interested in Minoan spirituality in any form, please come join us on Facebook. The group is called Ariadne's Tribe. And it's a public group, and we share everything from the latest archaeological find to what our altars look like to, gee, what do you think is the best color for this deity? And we're sort of piecing it together as we go. It's not a Reconstructionist tradition. It's modern neo-pagans doing Minoan.
Excellent. Is there any other social media that you use at this time?
Yeah, I have an author page on Facebook. I'm on all of them, Pinterest, Google+. I'm on DeviantArt for the Minoan art. It's all on my website, all those links.
And we will have links to those in our show notes.
Ooh, fabulous.
Yep. Laura, thank you for being with us. We're going to do our little sign out here. If you want to stick around to talk after the show. I don't have anything currently out. I still have all my books. I'm currently working on a World War I story that involves the gods.
Cool.
Which will be interesting. You working on anything in particular?
I'm not working on anything in particular, but this is the time of year when Pagan Pride events are beginning to happen. And so Pagan Pride Day will be taking place here in Indianapolis the last Saturday in September. And of course, my group, Elemental Spirits, will have a booth there. And in that booth, we will have stuff for our pagan prison ministry and other things like that. We usually get a turnout of about 1,000 people at that day. And all I can say is look in your area to see if there is a Pagan Pride event going on, because they take place worldwide, and come out and support us.
Awesome. And come to our website, scrollthoth.com, and get the show notes there. Also have our Amazon search window. If you're looking to buy something on Amazon, just type it in the little box. You'll see it on the right-hand side. You pay the same price. We get a couple pennies from Amazon. We also have a PayPal donation button. If you thought this show was worth $1, please throw $1 our way. Best way to get in contact with me is at the website Scroll of Thoth. James at scrollthoth.com if you want to send us email. JamesLWilbur.com, James L. Wilbur on Facebook, James L. Wilbur on Twitter, scrollthoth.tumblr.com, JamesLWilbur.tumblr.com. I'm all over the place.
I'm pretty easy to find. I'm just listed as Colleen Kelly on Facebook. So go ahead and look me up.
And our music for this podcast is provided by our wonderful friends at Shoebox Recordings. Thank you very much for talking with us, Laura.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
All right, I'm going to hit the stop broadcast here. Hold on just a second.